Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today we are discussing Self-Reliance by Emerson. And the way we are going to do that is in a highly interactive manner. This series that we have on Mondays is all about taking a fairly short piece that you can go through very quickly. The piece needs to be very deep. So a deep, short piece. So that allows all of us to focus on it. And then we are going to talk about what each of us gets from it. The aim is to get multiple perspectives on something very deep and learn about the piece as a result of that. We have used this technique really well in our study of Tao, the Jing. It's working beautifully. And I'm hoping to bring it to more to the Western corpus as well. So this is beginning of that. We started with Nietzsche, and now we are going, each Monday would be a different topic. It'll be a piece of literature, a small, very tiny, like a poem. Next time we are doing If by Rudyard Kipling, on the recommendation of Joe. Joe has been pushing for it for some time, and finally we are getting to it. But today is going to be Self-Reliance by Emerson. So what we're going to do is that first we're just going around and we're going to be talking about our take on Emerson's essay. All right, so if you have not read the essay, please hold off. If you read the essay, or if you've been studying Emerson for a long time, it doesn't matter the amount of work you put on it. Want to hear what you have to say. And once everybody has had a chance to have their say, I'll come up with some questions and we'll go into breakout rooms to discuss it in a much more free flow format with a small group of people, maybe 6 to 8 people. And then we'll come back with the best questions we have. And then we will all go ahead and try to answer them. All right, so that's the format. So first, who would like to start? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to talk about your take on this essay. Okay, let's start with, give me just a second. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark to get started. Okay, let's start with Joe, followed by Dan. Joe.
Yeah, so this essay is interesting, and we had done actually a previous meetup on self-reliance and in looking at Walden, and this was quite a while ago that we did that. So I had already kind of a frame of reference. We'd also done some meetups in Dan's group with Emerson as well. So I've been exposed to Emerson quite a bit, and I'm familiar with this essay as well. It really speaks to the idea of self-reliance for the individual, and then self-reliance as far as society is concerned and how it influences us, and the overall importance of self-reliance in our lives. In the one line, there is a time in every man's education where he arrives at the conviction that envy and ignorance, that imitation is a form of suicide. So it's a pretty severe take on it, but in a way, if you look at it the way he frames these things, that if we're merely accepting other people's ideas and not necessarily coming to our own personal conclusions, then we're not really being our authentic self. We're not following our intuition, which is actually interesting to think about that in today's terms, as a rule to follow our own personal intuition versus kind of more of a rational type of more system 2 type thinking approach. That he's telling you to actually go with your gut. But the overall theme with the self-reliance is really how to trust yourself, and essentially to figure out not to rely on the crowd to dictate your behavior. The other part about it was the idea is how not to allow material objects really influence your life. They're the objects, not the objects shouldn't be influencing you. You should be influencing the objects. So you're determining the value of objects as opposed to, and then that goes as not only material objects, but also how we hold up certain people in high regard, our heroes, so to speak. And if we hold people up at a very high level, that we shouldn't necessarily just, because we're imitating them at that point. So that's another aspect of it as well. Then there is the idea of how there's a societal aspect of this, and how religion and history and even books themselves kind of impact the way they frame our thinking, as opposed to allowing us to come to our own conclusions. And I think that this is a good example to talk about a little bit about Walden, where he actually went into the woods to live on his own, to kind of break away from the impact that, or the influences that society had put on him, so he could kind of come to his own conclusion and his own value system. And in doing that, he saw that as a form of overcoming as well. So there's another line in there, was I believe, nothing can bring you peace but yourself, nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. So you kind of have to come to your own principles, and in doing that, you'll become your authentic self and you'll be happy. That this is a way of living. So I have some other quotes, but I'm not going to share them. I mean, I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to share them throughout that I highlighted. But that's some of my initial takeaways.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. I mean, I see it as I love the quote that you quoted. I think that's my favorite quote from the entire book, about imitation is suicide, envy is ignorance, and imitation is suicide, because it just clearly says no to certain things, but it's almost, to me, it's almost like a poem to your own soul.
Absolutely. That's the best way to put it.
Incredibly beautiful. Thank you. So what we're going to do, I want to really have Dan talk about this in Stoicism, but I'm going to have other people go first, and then I'm going to go to Dan. It's going to be Evanique, Eric, and then Dan. Evanique.
Hi, so this is my first time ever reading a work of Emerson, ever. I thought it was interesting. I'm just going to pull up. So one of the things the first thing I thought of is authenticity and being your authentic self. And some of the things that brought me to it was the quote where it says, "We are afraid of truth, afraid of fortune, afraid of death, and afraid of each other. Our age yields great and perfect persons. We want men and women who shall renovate life and our social state, sorry." So to me, it just like feels like we're afraid of everything, like we're afraid of being our true selves. And there's another part where he talks about, people looking at status and looking at badges and things of that nature. And, we look up to people like presidents and leaders and all these people with titles, but we don't really know who they are as an individual or, know their lives. We're just impressed with the image that they present. And so that also went to the theme of authenticity. And the last thing I wanted to share, where I thought was really interesting, it says, prayer is the contemplation of the fact of life from the highest point of view. It is the soliloquy of a beholding and jubilant soul. Is the Spirit of God pronouncing his work good. But prayer means to effect a private end is meanness and theft. It's supposed opposes dualism and not unity in nature and consciousness. As soon as the man is at one with God, he will not beg. He will see prayer in all action, the prayer of the farmer kneeling in his field, weeding it, the prayer of the rower kneeling with the stroke of his oar, the true prayer heard throughout nature, for cheap ends. So I thought of that, and I thought of, like, when people said, "Oh, just let the Lord handle it," or they're just going to rely on God. He's like, no, it doesn't work like that. It's like the true relationship with God is that, yeah, you put up the prayer, but you also put up the work. And it just reminds me of a saying, God helps those who helps themselves. So it's, again, you still have to rely on yourself, which I think in modern times, we don't do that as much. We don't rely on self. We kind of want to, like, take the responsibility and put it on someone else for our lives. And I think the only way, like, I think the theme is, like, the only way you can live your true and authentic self is to be who you are without fear, and to kind of rely on your own self, not in a, like, independence, I don't need anybody type of way, but like Joe was saying, in the inner knowing of who you are, and relying on your true self and your instinct and your gut. So sometimes we have to combine all of that. So that's what I got.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Avanik. I think authenticity really captures it. This is saying be authentic and don't be fooled by external trappings. So it's one way, one key thing. The second thing is this: the passage that you chose about prayer is very deep. It's a certain view of religion. It is transcendental. It's very close to the Indian view of religion, where they think Brahman is everything, the God, and Atman is you. And the principle is you are that. So there is, and this is very much of, I think one of the inspirations for the transcendentalist, this notion that you're not trying to ask this other being for something, but you are you are part of nature. So it's very much kind of Taoist in that way, that it matches with that. It matches with the Indian philosophy. Thank you. So Dan, I want to have a detailed conversation with you. So I'm going to have everybody go first, and then I'm going to talk to you. Next up is going to be Eric and Jyoti. Eric.
Hi, everyone. I really enjoyed reading Emerson. I just finished his a little bit of his journals as well. I think I'm going to build upon what Joe and Ebony had said. So one of the quotes that I like is, "The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be." That really resonated with me. Growing up Catholic, there was a lot of expectations on what society, culture, religion expects you to be in life, and also what others, family, friends, even expect you to be. And it's really up to you to decide, what path you are to go, and not really what others choose the path for you. And I think that's what we have so much in society is, and I try to instill that in my children as well. Like, I expose them to religion, but like it's and when they grow up, it's really up to them it's not up to me to dictate one religion or another. I'm really that's really strong feelings for that with me. And then one of the last quotes I like is the last part of this. It says, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles." I'm really into Stoicism, as you may know. I've done a lot of meetups with that. And that's what I like Emerson. And I'm very curious on what Dan has to say about linking that, because I'm really into Walden as well as Thoreau and Emerson as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. And this is I mean, what happens is that most people find it easy to just follow tradition, to do whatever the expectations of the society, their family is, and they kind of, in order to make their way into the world, they choose that again and again and again. And in that sense, they kind of forget to actually kind of hear themselves, hear the core of themselves, because the core of themselves is actually quiet. It's the silent, it's the silence at the core of you. And it is something which is imperceptible. It is inside you. Whereas everything, all the expectations that are there out there around you, reinforced by people around you on a continual basis. So it's basically saying, go inside and act from inside. Thank you. Next up is Jyoti. Folks, if you want to share what you got from the essay, go ahead and type exclamation mark.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hi, all. Joe, Ebony, and Eric, they did a good job in explaining, but I was especially impressed by his definition. Why is it important to be self-reliant in the first place? I'm going to read that paragraph. I was very happy to read that because that kind of jives just with my notions. While getting help from others, including friends and family, can be an important part of your life and can be fulfilling. However, help may not always be available, or the help you do receive is not what you had hoped for. It is for this reason that Emerson pushed for self-reliance. If a person was independent, could solve their own problems, and be able to fulfill those needs and desires for themselves, they would be a stronger member of the society. And I've seen that in my own life as an immigrant. I had to become self-reliant, and there's nothing wrong in that. You can get the help that you want, but the help is not always there. And that's, so this really works for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jyoti. And it's interesting you bring up immigrants, because immigrants, if you look at it, they are in a very odd position. Most people grow up in a culture, use the cultural values to shape themselves, and most of them never question them. And there is never an occasion to question them. Largely, there are some kind of at the edge there is, but at largely, there is not much of an opportunity to confront them. Immigrants, especially immigrants who come here when they are adults, have a unique opportunity. And that's how I saw it. Like, in India, people took a whole bunch of things for granted, that this is how you do things. Of course, this is how you do things. I come here also people take a whole bunch of things for granted, but they're completely different. Now, if you are actually curious, see, most immigrants actually stay with a large part of what they grew up with. And they mostly deal with the economic, political, they integrate with their adopted country at the economic level, but at the core level, they remain people from there. But it's a chance for you to actually consider. These people are considered this to be normal. These people are considered this to be normal. What do I think about it? This or that or something else? It gives you a chance to question pretty much everything about how you think, what you take for as normal, what you take for given. And so there is that chance. So it's enormously hard, but because you're leaving everything behind, everything that you know behind, to start over without any base. But the upside is that you have a chance to actually make yourself as an adult. You made yourself as a child, but it was mostly other people around you. Didn't have the full capacity, don't have full reason, full ability to initiate things. This is an opportunity that is there for immigrants. I don't know. I don't think most immigrants take it, but I think quite a few do. Even the decision to come here is a relevant thing. I was telling Joe, it's basically American dream is rejuvenated and renewed by immigrants, because that context of immigrants is actually very similar to the original context of America than that of most people. Jyoti, you wanted to say something?
No, I agree with you that immigrants make the most use of it.
Thank you.
That's what I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Andre, followed by James. Andre.
Yeah, so I think you guys mentioned Nietzsche. Nietzsche had a saying about how to test an idea. He said that to really kind of test an idea, you really have to try it out. You have to put it into practice, because only then you'll know if it works or not. So if you take this idea of self-reliance really seriously, like I'm talking, like this is your guiding principle number one, then I don't think it works in all situations. So you really have to discriminate in what situations this principle applies and which doesn't. I think it's foolish to isolate yourself from the social world. And I don't think that's what Emerson means when he said self-reliance. I don't think he's advocating everybody becoming a hermit and kind of living in their cabin in the woods or something like that. I think that's bad living. So I think you have to negotiate with people that's around you. It's okay that you have your own voice, but you also then have to acknowledge that other people have their voices. So you can either fight them and kind of, force your voice on top of theirs and subjugate them. That's one strategy. The other strategy is you can run away and just let their voice to overcome your voice. So this is kind of subjugation. Or you can learn to negotiate with other people. And I think that's what Emerson may be talking about. You have to live together in the social world. Just that's the reality of the world. So as an example, so to learn a trade, you have to become an apprentice, and you do have to imitate a master. You have to follow his system if you want to learn a specific trade or profession. So in the beginning, you do have to sacrifice your self-reliance until you get enough knowledge, enough tools to actually become your own master. Once you become your own master, and I think that's when the self-reliance principle applies. When you actually become competent at something, that's the place and time for you to become self-reliant, because you basically arrived at the point of you kind of master a specific profession, and there's nobody else that you can learn from. So at that point, you do really have to follow your voice and your consciousness to press forward into the unknown. And I think that's what Emerson really means, is that once you become competent at something and you join a society, so you have to live in society, but at that point, you really have to kind of press forward into unknown using the self-reliance principle.
Brilliant point, Andre. Really love it. And what we'll do is that we'll put this as one of the questions in the breakout rooms to discuss. And I agree with you that it's not, I mean, we've also studied Tao Te Ching. We're studying Tao Te Ching, and the same issue comes up. Is it about leaving the culture and retreating to nature? Or can you achieve self-reliance in the midst of a city? Can you have your inner voice, your soul active, fully active in the middle of a city? And if so, how do you do it? What is the dance between the individual spirit and the social structures? Is it either or is it and? And if it is and, what kind of conditions are required? What kind of principles are required, both of social organization and your individual morality, individual way of operating to achieve a union? How do you do the one in many while preserving the integrity of each of the many? So these are very deep questions. And that's one of the questions that we are going to ask in the breakout rooms. So thank you very much, Andre. Really, really appreciate that. Next up is going to be James, Kevin, and Joe. James.
Yeah, I agree with Andre that it's you know, in the beginning you're part of this, you know, each individual is part of the developmental process of you know, first you know, was it, you are imitating other people and you are taking in society, you know, the language and so forth, and you learn how to play those language games. But at some point Emerson is saying that you cannot sell your liberty and your power, your inner power, and that you have to be adamant about being yourself. He says that I cannot break myself any longer for you. If you can love me for what I am, we shall be happier. We shall be the happier, right? And so, you know, he's talking about nonconformity. And so the individual, in order to be self-reliant, has to be a nonconformist at the same time. Not in isolation from society, but in the midst of society, to, at the same time, be a nonconformist. Right? Like the other quote where he says, imitation is suicide. So, so he's talking about this inner power that each individual has. And this is really a pretty good transition from Nietzsche, because I understand that Nietzsche read Emerson and was influenced by Emerson. And maybe he came up with this idea of self-reliance also from Emerson, the idea of individual actualization, overcoming of one's limitations and to become yourself. So, so this is really interesting. And Emerson has a writing style that is very unique. And some of the quotes are really quite special. Sometimes I had a hard time struggling to understand, get used to how he's saying and what he's saying. But it's really quite powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James. I want to read out one quote where he captures exactly what James and Andre are saying. The easy thing in the world is to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after one's own. But the great man is he who in midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. So how do you do both together? So that will be one of the questions in the breakout rooms. Now, this is such a good question that I'm going to now work very hard to find another question that goes with it, one or two, hopefully another one. One more would be, so we'll formulate it, but this is great. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by Joe. Kevin.
Thank you, Frank. I understand self-reliance is based on self-discovery, and we see from the book, from external initially try mimic, even it's he called suicide. We still start from there. Then start self-question. Then change our own idea with the external philosophical or other knowledge we get. Then it start balance those things. Then keep dig down. Then slowly close to the facts and the truth. Yeah, we need a self-grown mindset to learn ourselves and the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we're going to go for now. The next one is going to be Joe, followed by Dan, and then we are going to go into the breakout rooms. Currently, the two questions I have in mind for the breakout room is, what does self-reliant mean to you? So just the concept of self-reliance, what does it mean to you? And the second one is that how do you achieve self-reliance while operating successfully in the midst of society? Okay, so those are the two questions for the breakout rooms. Next up is going to be Joe.
Yeah, just really briefly, I wanted to make sure I clarified something that that was Thoreau that
Sure.
had written
Sure.
Walden. And I made a comparison. But there is a lot to compare there as far as self-reliance goes. But really quickly, I do think it's important to distinguish between the idea of non-conforming with the idea of whether you're integrating with the rest of society or that you're dependent, like you're never totally independent of society. And I think that I forget who had mentioned it, that it's a negotiation essentially that you're doing, but you're just not conforming your basic principles in that process. And I wanted to clarify that. That was a very good point.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Dan. Dan, why do you like Emerson? And how is it connected to Stoicism? So let's start with Emerson. What do you think of Emerson? What do you like? What do you like about him?
Do I have 2 or 3 hours to cover this?
No, you got about, let's give a short answer in about 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, the reason why I like Emerson and the Transcendentalists is that when I began studying them as well as Stoicism, I found many interesting crossovers. And all of this is timeless wisdom that whether it's Stoic and 2,000 years old or just with Emerson and Thoreau and the Transcendentalists in the 1800s, it's amazing how both groups, the Stoics and them, they express these ideas in their own ways, and yet they're very meaningful. For example, the first interesting tie over is skepticism, where the Stoics and are always talking about, you can be skeptical. And of course, Emerson and Thoreau, they would often talk about think independently, be an individual, find your own path, as someone mentioned before. There's a famous quote of making your own path through the forest and not just following others. Then another area that crosses over very nicely is dealing with difficulty. The Stoics are always talking about obstacles and overcoming them. Well, think about how Emerson would discuss finding your own potential. And that, of course, naturally brings us to the dealing with the difficulty and growing from it, personal growth, very big. If Emerson were alive today, he'd be as popular as Tony Robbins, I think, in motivational speaking. And then another interesting crossover for me is the self-reliance itself, in a simple way, is just the idea of being persistent and, not giving up too easily. Now, of course, there's a lot of nuance you could add to that, but Stoics and Transcendentalists are very much in the same area here. And finally, I'll wrap up by saying my famous or my favorite quote in this essay is, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." That one is my favorite because it talks about today, very real things that we have, is that if we have a foolish consistency, that is, we keep believing the same things and we just keep on believing them because we think, well, I must be right. Well, we overlook things like bias and the other tensions of the mind, like cognitive dissonance. We should, as a Stoic once said, Marcus Aurelius, is that we should be open to new things. If you can show me something and prove it, I will gladly accept it. So I think Emerson and Marcus Aurelius are very much in the same boat on that one. So much more to go through, but also I'm so glad, Shrikant, that you're covering this topic today. Everyone's so interested in Emerson and Thoreau. And if you'd like to hear more, remember that the Emerson Central website is a free resource. It has all of Emerson's essays, first and second series. And then, of course, my group, the Emerson and Thoreau meetup group, I put the link in the chat window. If you'd like to have monthly meetings about Emerson and Thoreau, we're here for you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. All right. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to go into the breakout rooms. And what we'll do is we'll have the breakout rooms facilitated by 3 people. Dan, is it okay if you facilitate one of the rooms?
Sure.
Okay. So the purpose in the room is that we are discussing two questions. First is, what do you think about what do you understand by self-reliance? Okay, please give 1 or 2 minutes for everybody to talk about that. So two questions. One is, what do you understand, or how do you understand self-reliance? And second, what is the connection between self-reliance and interfacing with society? What is the relationship between, how do you see that? Okay, let everybody speak for 1 to 2 minutes and then have a discussion. We'll be back here in about 20 minutes. The rules in the breakout rooms is keep on topic, be brief, and be courteous. All right, with that, it's going to be Evanique, Joe, and Dan facilitating the breakout rooms. I'm starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right, so it's time for the lightning round. The way it works is that you pose the most important question you have about self-reliance. Go ahead and type exclamation mark to put your question on the table. I'll go ahead and collect all the questions, organize them, and then we are all going to try to answer them one by one. So let's start with Joe. Type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to put your question on the table. Next up is going to be Joe, Eric, and Lloyd. Joe.
So there's a little bit, and maybe this is my own personal, maybe I'm misunderstood when I'm reading Emerson, but the idea how you're dealing with order and chaos in this particular circumstance, because it seems like to me that in Emerson that you're not giving any, you're not letting the past influence you at all. And that to me seems like it would only be chaos, that you would only be engaging with chaos. And is that really productive?
Okay.
So like, how does, I don't know how to frame that as the question. Maybe you could.
Sure. So the question is, how does the idea of self-reliance relate to the idea of the dance between order and chaos that we have talked about in many, many meetups? So just self-reliance, how does it relate to the idea of order and chaos?
Yes.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Eric, followed by Lloyd. Eric.
I'll read just a sentence or two, and then maybe we can get a question out of it. As our religion, our education, our art look abroad, so does our spirit of society. All men plume themselves on the improvement of a society, and no man improves. And then he goes, society never advances. So I just want to hear the groups, like, you know, because I've studied ancient history and stuff, and it seems like we haven't really, we have technology advances, but we really advanced as a society in terms of like ethics and morals, equal rights, and that sort of thing. So maybe you could form it a better question, but that's, sure. I've wondered that for a while. So it's good to see it.
Excellent, thank you. So I'll put it as, does society improve over time? Next up is going to be Lloyd. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like everybody to be discussing the question that you put on the table. Lloyd.
Sure. Thanks, Shrikant. What should we do if we fail asserting our independence, like the transcendentalists essentially failed at sustaining transcendental communities like Fruitlands?
You're saying what happens, what would you do if you fail to?
Yeah, what should we do if we fail asserting our independence?
Got it. Okay, what should we do if we fail to assert our independence? Next up is Jyoti.
Yeah, we were in the process of discussing this about the conformity, whether we should conform to the rules or norms of the society. And if we don't, aren't we misfits?
Okay, very good. Conformity, should we conform to norms of the society? If not, are we misfits? Very good. To achieve. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Last chance for questions. All right, let's go for answers. Let's see which ones. Okay, let's start with Jyoti's question. So should we conform to society? And if we don't, are we misfits? How should we look at the issue of conforming to society? If you'd like to answer it, or how do you see it about conforming to society? Let's start with Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik.
That's a really good question. I think the answer is, what does it mean to conform to society? It also begs the question, what is society in general? So I guess I'll start with, when you think of conforming to society, it's doing what everybody else does just for the sake of doing it without thinking. And I think when you do that, then no, you don't conform to society. I think in a sense, though, we all have to conform to society, like to the norms of society, in order to get where you want to go. In a sense, like you conform to like your job, like you conform to the ways of your job and the culture of your job. Unless, of course, that job's culture is just damaging and wrong, then you leave, hopefully. But if you do conform to that. And I don't see a problem with that, as long as you know why you're doing it, as long as you're not losing yourself in it. So I think, now, are you misfits if you don't conform? I don't know if I would use the word misfit. I think I would use, you're just different. And if conforming to society or to a group it's untrue for you, or it doesn't feel good for you, or you don't feel okay with it, like it's not your authentic self, then you're not a misfit. You're just being who you are. You may be seen as that by others, but I don't think you yourself as a person should internalize it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Joe. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is a good question. I don't think you'll be a misfit, because you'll be arriving at your authentic self, as Evanik had said. So that's kind of what the whole goal. So I don't think you'll be a misfit in your own eyes, but you will be isolated if you don't conform. And that may be okay with you, but I don't necessarily think you're going to be, this is kind of the goal, right? To arrive at your own conclusions and saying, okay, I'm not going to conform. I'm going to go do my own thing. Now, I would add, obviously, what does conformity mean in this particular context? That doesn't necessarily mean breaking the law or things along those lines. Then there are problems. But what I look at it is like, are you going to conform to doing what conform to social norms? And I don't think you'll be a misfit, but you'll be isolated. I think those two are different. Some people don't mind being isolated.
Wonderful. Does anybody else want to speak on this? I mean, the way I see it is I use Louis Sullivan's concepts of form and function. So conform is for, like you make your function according to the forms which are there. So I think that's, I think of it in terms of, there are certain forms that society has that are there for a reason, that makes the functions actually function. Like, for example, one of the clear examples are the examples that Joe talked about. It's not like about murdering people or stuff like that. You're not saying I'm being nonconformist, okay? So there are functions that people have, and there are forms that are created by the society. Some of the forms actually are in accordance with the function. Some of the forms are not. Again, when you're trying to do self-reliance, it's kind of, there are things that you can do which are just arbitrary, which are just your feelings, which are not really, that go deep into, they're not coming from something deep inside you, but they are coming from your temporary emotion reaction to something. Those kind of things are, those are actually fads. Just like society has fads, these are like individual fads. Those two are not what he's talking about. He's talking about the deep down core of you. And if there is something in society which is actually killing the deep down core of you, then your option is to let that core die to some extent, little by little, or to forge your own path. But it's not like either I follow the society or I follow what I feel like. That's, I think, a false dichotomy, because there are different kinds of forms of the society, and there are different kinds of emotion. The self is a very complex thing. It's not like self-reliance is not like, okay, whatever I feel like is right. There are a whole bunch of things within the self which are right and wrong, which are consonant with the core of who you are and dissonant with the core of who you are. And there are some and similar things in society. So those are the things that you have to kind of look at. That's how I look at it. Next up is Bunny.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer the question. I'm only speaking from my own personal perspective here, and coming from a religious background, that to non-conform to society and coming from a biblical ideology that I grew up with, I'm going to say I've been going through mental breakdowns with this issue, literally, like sleepless nights and stuff, and talking to myself. And, it's it's an uphill battle. It's like climbing Mount Everest, because the society is much stronger than, like the medieval times where the Bible was the leader of everything. And unfortunately, it's almost like you don't have much of a choice. I know there are people who have their own, way of doing things and stuff, but I think that there's just no way to completely be nonconformist and have peace of mind at the same time. It's just the way the world is. And so, yeah, I think that's just where I am right now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Bunny. Appreciate that. Folks, if you want to further put a question on the table, you can go ahead and type a question mark. So that's how I can distinguish it from yours wanting to give an answer. Next question is going to be on what happens. Sade, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Shrikant. I didn't mean to interrupt you moving on, but I just had one comment.
Please take your time. Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like what everyone said was great. And like, it's kind of impossible if you're being authentic to who you are and self-reliant to be a misfit, because it's defined by you. But in terms of society, I think rather than being a misfit, perhaps you were misunderstood by others, because when I think of all of, some of the greatest revolutionary icons that we look up to nowadays, all of those people were considered so-called misfits in society at that time. So perhaps, there is that element of, you might be, troubled, or like the previous person just said, or you might feel like, it's kind of impossible to, like, you will never have that peace inside, like if you're not conforming. However, there is a possibility that once you're gone, as you were authentic to yourself, that authenticity, that revolutionary idea might be recognized later on as people realize it was just misunderstood. So kind of how some of the greatest artists are the most troubled people in the world. Yes. So maybe, if you're a true genius, you actually, there's a possibility of being very unhappy, but, happy to yourself, but maybe in society, there's constant contradiction.
Excellent point. That's amazing point. It's profoundly true, because what happens is that if everybody conforms, the society remains what it is. And it mostly not just remains, because like nothing in life is static. If everybody conforms, then it starts to go down because it's not able to even respond to any kind of changes that are taking place around it. So all of the progress that we have is based on people who choose to not conform to the current system and say, this is better, and this is why I think it is better. Fight for it, and they are regarded, and everybody, all the heroes that we look at, they say, oh yeah, these are great. In their own times, often, or not even often, most of the time, it is very rare that they were thought of well by most people during their time. And to even achieve that, and generally it took time for people to realize that. The others to acknowledge what they were doing. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Evanique. Sorry, it's going to be Laura. Laura.
Okay, I just think that most of the so-called geniuses, I don't think knew what they were sort of out of their mind too, They don't think they were thinking about things in the way that they were looking to be leaders or, great men or women. They were involved in their own little world of ideas and their work and their art. And most of the time their art was not accepted while they were alive at all. They were considered to be bizarre. Those were the misfits in the world, actually, were these so-called geniuses, in my opinion, if you want to look at it that way. They were weird.
Wonderful.
And the other people were they weren't misfits. They didn't quite fit into the block of exactly the exactness of society, but they were close enough. Maybe they just seemed a little funky in some way, but they still, like, they went to work in the same way you did. So, but maybe they looked a little funny or something. But I don't know. Those are misfits in the sense of just not quite fitting in. But
thank you.
Yeah, that's what I feel about misfits.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate it. Next up is Evanique. You had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to know if there's ever a time where it is okay to conform, or it's good to conform.
Okay, very good, very good. Is it, okay, when is it good to conform and when is it not? How about that? When is it good to conform and when it is not? So, because it is related to what we are just discussing, let's take that question up. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to answer. Laura, you wanted to answer. Go ahead.
Well, about that, but then I would ask the question about the same thing. When do you know you're a genius, or when, that question also.
Okay.
Okay, so add that to that part. Sure.
Thank you. Next up is Katie.
I liked Joe's point about getting isolated. I think that is definitely one of the big risks of not conforming, is people then not feeling comfortable with your beliefs and pushing you out. So it really depends on, it might be a job or something, maybe you need to go along with policies or something, maybe to keep your job, or I could political beliefs, maybe you don't quite believe what the people around you believe, but then they wouldn't hire you for a job. I don't know, there's lots of situations where it's better to just toe the line. And
wonderful, thank you. Let's see, Jyoti, what do you think?
I think if you, by not conforming, you are going to affect the physical or the mental health of the people, then you are better off giving up your principle to, and conform. This is, you have to just take into consideration who you are working with, what their goals are, and how they want to proceed. Because a bigger vision is very important in life. So you just can't hold on to, get stuck with your principles, and for the sake of principles you argue and you just don't do the right thing. That's how I feel.
Thank you, Jyoti. I mean, one of the things that is pointing to is So the question is, when is it good to conform, and when is it not good to conform? How do you decide between that? And what I'm seeing from this discussion is this issue of individual versus society, or what is the proper relationship between kind of listening to your own self and operating in the society. That issue is still an alive issue. So we'll come back to that as a direct question at some point. Next up is the question that I think Eric was raising. Does society improve over time? In this respect, does the society improve over time? What do you think? It's a very deep question. Joe.
Yeah, that it's a really deep and challenging question as well. I guess it comes down on how you determine progress, and how you how do you define progress? I'm sorry, in the sense that if you're looking at it from a perspective of, are we any more wise today than we were before, as far as understanding what wise actions to take? I don't know if we've progressed that far in that sense. So when you're asking about principles, and you're asking about principles in this matter.
Let's do one thing. Because Eric has been thinking about it for some time.
Yeah.
Eric, can you go ahead and state the question again and kind of elaborate on the question so it is clear to everybody what the question is?
Yeah, I guess it's more, for me, it's more how come society hasn't improved as far as morals, acceptance, ethics. How do we have all this technology? How do we excel in technology, and we don't excel in basic human, I don't know, acceptance? I guess I can't put it into words, but maybe that helps a little bit define it.
That's good. That's good. That's very useful. Thank you. Let's see, Joe, do you want to?
Yeah, having that clarification is, I think we've had different moral systems that have actually been developed over time, different philosophical ways of life that we've lived over time. So I do think there has been progress as far as accepting people for who they are. I think there's been tremendous progress in that area. So I don't necessarily agree with that we haven't made progress in that area. I also think that there are different philosophical approaches that have been developed in relatively recent years, past 150, 200 years, whether it be something like utilitarianism is a different way of looking at the world than, say, the Stoics would look at the world. So I think that they have developed different systems in that time frame over a period of time as well. So there's been progress in that area, that there's different schools of thought that have been developed. So I guess I disagree with the idea that there hasn't been progress.
Thank you. Next up is Lloyd. Lloyd, do you think the society has improved over time?
Yes, I do. I agree with Joe's assessment. I think greater men than I have observed that. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think, said, don't want to misquote him, but the arc of history bends toward justice. And I think that's absolutely right. I think it's a much more accepting society. In 1896, the Supreme Court, said that separate but equal is constitutional. That was shot down in '54 with Brown versus the Board of Ed. Separate but equal is not constitutional. So, you know, I mean, there are a lot of different ways you could measure that. I don't have such a bleak view. I think one of the problems, though, is that when you have states' rights competing with the actions of the federal government, it does inhibit change and makes it a lot slower. You know, I mean, unfortunately, it's just not like one country makes a decision and that's abiding for everybody. You know, you have states' rights and you want to respect that. So in certain states, they do what they want. So it's a lot slower, but I still agree with Joe that it's overall much better, much more egalitarian, and we're striving to be more equal, you know, genuinely. I don't think that's, you know, baloney.
Thank you, Lloyd. Next up is going to be Jyoti, Eric, and Laura. Jyoti.
Yeah, my answer to this question is, in many ways, there has been an improvement, and in other ways, like Eric said, hasn't been that much of an improvement. Society has learned over the years to become politically correct. However, if you look at the subtle things they do, you can say, well, that's not going in upward mobility direction. It's not going that way. Because when you look at subtle things that people are doing. So it depends on what strata of life you are assessing them. You know, if technology, yes, definitely there has been a lot of advancement. When I was growing up, you know, there was no iPhone, there was no computer and what have you. Yes, every day there is some improvement. Now they're talking about the Ray-Ban glasses for the Google. So it's you know, it depends on how you're looking at it. But if you're looking at where, you know, when you work with the people and you say, no, not really, their ways haven't changed that much. They're still thinking about all those things, but they had just learned how to become very politically correct. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is going to be Eric, Laura, and Sade. Eric.
Yeah, in all my life, I'm not very politically correct at times, and I'm not going to do this here. I'm definitely going to push back, and there's no offense to be taken with this. So Joe and the first guy, no offense, but, and I can say this because you guys said you think there was no progress in society has made. I will respectfully disagree. My idea, and I'm a white guy, you guys, no offense, you're two white guys. And I find it interesting that Joey sounded female and she says it's politically correct. And it depends how you're looking at it. Well, when I say society, and I think this is what Emerson wrote, and I think this is what he meant, is society, not just society for the white person, white male especially, it's global. It's like it's hierarchies. It's like not just your little yourself, your family, your village, your city, your country. It is a global thing. It's a cosmopolitan. And in that sense, I will push back every day that this world we live in, and it's a world, it is not equal. Look at Afghanistan, what's going on now. You know, a basic woman's right to education. Even in this country, they just finally took down the Robert E. Lee statue just now from political pressure. I push back hard on that, and I am a white person, but I've been in the military and I've been around a lot of different cultures and a lot of different ethnicities, and we have not progressed. And that's why I brought this up. And that's why when I read this, it really was heartfelt to me, because it's not. Does every race and culture have the same opportunities? Actually, we learned about, you know, Jefferson and Washington in school, and I forgot the name of the book, and I'll try to get it before this thing, but I think his name was Robert Carter. There's a book on Robert Carter. It only had like 12 stars or something, not very many things, but he was a wealthy landowner in Virginia, and he for whatever reason, he actually freed his slaves back then. In the same time, so how did he transform himself? He not only freed them, but he took the time to actually educate them and give them land after extreme pushback from all the other wealthy white men, landowners in Virginia. So, but that's a small, and we never learned about that. I never learned about that. I'm sure nobody on this call ever learned about this. You learned about Jefferson and all those others. So I'll stop there, but as you can tell, I'm very fired up about this. And I think more people should be, so we have a better society and a better world.
Thank you, Eric. Next up is Laura, Sade, and Joe. Laura, do you think that society has improved over time?
Well, if you look at all the marginalized groups in our society, and some of these have been generational, I would say not, okay? I don't think we've done a good job in helping to bring equity in living standards for Americans across the board. It's disgusting, actually. I would say what we do with, people who have been released from prison, we certainly don't do anything for them to really bring them back into society. In fact, we make it more desirable for them to go back to prison. So that's pretty sad. So I think that group of people, certainly for indigenous people, we haven't done much for them. So no, I'm not going to go with that. It's improved that much overall on that scope. And I think it's a large amount, and we should be really ashamed of ourselves after all these hundreds of years. So.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Sade.
Yes. So on this topic, I feel like it would be more accurate to say that society, instead of improved, that perhaps it has evolved, because I feel like the word improved kind of indicates that there is good or bad, and to me, when you think of morality and good or bad, that's kind of determined on a very individual level, and it's not objective. And that's why we have a lot of issues now, because, we're debating like what is an objective good, what is an objective bad. And I kind of feel like, in my opinion, life is more so seen as an action and a reaction. So perhaps it has improved in the sense that, like if you look at someone who's really poor and then they get, they win the lottery, they have a large sum of money, and so they're able to, no longer struggle to cover the grocery bill or buy a good house instead of renting or what be it. But then on the flip side, as they say, more money, more problems, right? So every action has a reaction. You can have good things in one sense, but then you have this cascade of quote unquote bad things that kind of follow it. So yeah, that's I think more of an evolution would be a more accurate word to say. And then we can kind of debate on issue by issue, has this issue improved, versus that issue. But overall, I think it's more of an evolution.
Thank you, Sade. Next up is going to be Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the disagreement. So I mean, I think it's good. I think the question is, have we progressed at all? I mean, it's not, are we perfect? And those are two different questions. And I think that that's the distinction that you have to make. Yes, there are other countries that have made absolutely no progress at all. And so for that particular, and in that particular instance, yes, they are not, there's various reasons as to why. But even if you look at like some of the statistics, would you rather be a African American now or in 1776? I mean, would you rather be would you rather be a woman now, or would you rather be a woman in the late 1800s? I mean, these are the questions. If you're asking about progress, I'm not saying progress and perfection are two different things. And perfection is usually something that's always in the future as well. But I would just make that small distinction. I didn't mean to imply that we've arrived by any stretch of the imagination, but I do mean to say that I think if you presented the options to most people, that they would probably choose to live today versus going back in time.
Thank you. I mean, my only perspective is that I am a student of history. So when I think of a question, has society improved? I said what it was like 100,000 years ago, before agriculture, with just tribes and fighting each other and very short lives. And we've gone. It's a long progress. I certainly see tremendous progress. It's certainly not perfection, but there are big steps here and there. It's not easy, it is very distributed. Each person bears a responsibility. You can't make things happen at a global level. It has to happen at a local level. It happens in steps. So it's a far more complicated kind of progress. There is retrogression in the middle. So it is far more complicated. And I would invite you to look at the entire history and look at what things were like across history. So that's how I look at this question. But this is not the question that we are discussing today. We're discussing about self-reliance. So I'm going to bring the discussion back to that. What happens when you try to be self-reliant and you fail? How do you handle that? Any thoughts? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Evanik.
When you try and you fail, the first the quick answer would be you just try again. But I think the more important question, or the more important thought, is if you're trying to be self-reliant, have you really failed? Like, what does it mean to fail at trying to be self-reliant? I don't think there's a perfect way to be self-reliant. I think that's for you, and when I say for you, I mean for the individual. So I think it's your standard, and if you're not hitting your standard, but you're trying, you're not failing, you're just learning. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that you're not failing. Like, the only way you're failing is if you fail to learn from the lack of self-reliance. So I think if you're learning, you're not failing at all. And so just learn from it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Laura, Lloyd, Joe, and Bunny. Laura.
I was just thinking of an example. Suppose you want to go to school to study a specific major, like suppose you want to become a doctor. So you have to do a certain undergraduate degree, and you find it very difficult. You hit organic chemistry, and that it's terrible, and you're very unsuccessful. So you hit kind of a block in your pathway to succeed. And so you've been unsuccessful in this thing, and you were doing well, but you needed help at a certain point. And because you're so self-reliant, you couldn't break down and ask for a tutor. So you wound up failing in that regard. You let yourself down because you should have gotten help, and you couldn't bring yourself to get the help you needed. And it caused you not to pass a course that's really important to you for your future. And so that was a situation where, you wanted to be self-reliant, and it failed you. Your goal of being self-reliant and doing everything on your own failed you in getting through that course. So to me, that would be a situation where you just have to sit down and really understand what where your failing was in the situation, and get yourself back on, going, and you know, this time get a tutor for organic chemistry so that you can pass it. And, you know, be self-reliant where you can, but once you see that you're having some problems, I think the intelligent thing would be, as a self-reliant individual, would be to get the help I needed to, you know, and that's still being self-reliant, you know, because you made a very good decision on your own to do something. And I would take that as the higher order thing and still feel self-reliant that I got a tutor.
Excellent. Excellent point, Laura. Next up is going to be Lloyd, Bunny, and Joe. Lloyd.
Yeah, I just wanted to explain the impetus for my question. Fortunately, I know a bit about the transcendentalists.
No.
And-
But can you first answer your question? What happens? What do you do when you're trying to be self-reliant and you fail? What do you do?
You go to work for somebody else. Basically, the transcendentalists tried to found a separate sustainable community amongst themselves. And unfortunately, they went through a number of communities, but they weren't able to sustain themselves for any significant length of time. Things like Fruitlands and other communities failed to be sustainable. So the answer is they had to go back to working for other people. It was good they tried it, you know, but at some point you got to say, we tried it a lot, you know, a lot of times, it didn't work. So I'm going to go back to work for other people. I don't like taking other people's money because you got to kind of, you know, do their will. You take the king's shilling and you got to take the king's SHIT. I don't want to say it, but I guess they just had to go back to work for other people, and they couldn't sustain it. You know, that's it.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Bunny, followed by Joe and Joe. Bunny. Bunny, you need to unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, what do you do when you're trying to be self-reliant and you fail,
Yes.
right? So I can just go from my perspective, obviously, like we all do, but I think what depends on the situation, of course, but most people just end up, in what I see, obviously, is that people just end up being more of a failure, I feel, inside, because they need people, but at the same time, like, they're scared to ask. And you know, that's sort of a person that I am in my thinking of going back to like 75, 100 years ago, where people could ask, because that was the form of community where people helped each other and knew their neighbors and things like that. And now it's like we're too scared to even ask anybody for help, because we're living in a sort of society to be individual and to be self-reliant. So I really feel like it's gotten worse, and I feel like although people, like I said, do need help, it's like, how do you go about when you do fail, how do you go about and not being fearful of asking for some form of help when you really need it? Because I know I go through that myself.
Wonderful, excellent point. All these are really interesting points, and I am hoping to talk about all of them after Joe and Jyoti. Joe followed by Jyoti.
I guess so. I mean, under the framework that Lloyd had laid out, where they tried their own community and they failed. Okay, that's a failure. On an individual level, I don't see how you can fail. I mean, here's the thing: you're becoming your authentic self. You're arriving at your own principles. You're living your own life. I don't see how you necessarily fail in doing that. So it's something that's like saying, unless you're just saying that I misunderstood myself, that would be the way I would look at it, is that I maybe was going down this path and I should have been going down this path. And so this is my authentic self. So you have a discovery in the process, but I don't necessarily think it's a pass fail kind of scenario. In that what you're looking for, and I mean, I guess if you're talking about maybe not being able to sustain yourself, well, then you do what Lloyd had mentioned, you conform. You conform real fast because you need a job, but those aren't principles. Those are externals to what society's actually dictating on you, and that's actually what you're supposed to be getting away from. So I look at it as something, you arrived at your own principles, and the only failure you can have is that you decide to have another set of principles. That's
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Jyoti.
Yeah, first thing I will say is that self-reliance is like a degree. A degree of self-reliance varies with every stage of life. You are young and strong and healthy, you're very self-reliant. You don't depend on anybody. You get older, you become feeble, fragile, and suddenly you have to now depend on other people. So, having said that, I think you have to accept your weaknesses and your strengths. So you have to then just comply and seek help. Otherwise, you're out of commission, you're out of business. You are going to die alone. So that's just one example. The other one would be all your life when you have had yourself strong and healthy, and then you lose a spouse, and then you suddenly start looking at yourself and say, well, things that I used to cope with on my own, I can't cope. I need to be with people. I need to sit and talk to people. So what do you do? No, but I was never that kind of person. I always depended on myself. No, you said, okay, now you're at a different stage of life. So give up. So there's nothing wrong in giving up your principles either.
Thank you, Jyoti. Okay, so I want to comment on all these points, but I'm going to start by telling a story. I was actually at Massimo had invited folks to. Laura, do you have a very quick point? You have already spoken on this, but very quick. Go ahead. You need to unmute though.
No, no. I was going to say something from my own perspective. It's a complicated issue, you know. I keep saying I'm going to do stuff. I'm going to do it till I can't do it because I want to be self-reliant. I've always wanted that. I hate when people have to. I have to ask people for help, and I hate when people constantly offer help for me because I don't want it. And it's complicated. It's hard to give it up. When you want to be self-reliant, it's really hard to give it up. You don't want people's help. That's all I can tell you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me continue with my story. So this is a very interesting thing. You know, Massimo had invited people. He said that there was a high school, and the high school had arranged something really interesting. They had called a whole bunch of speakers to talk about a whole bunch of philosophy topics. And so everybody, and there was a whole series of topics. Massimo was talking about something, there were a whole bunch of topics. And one of the topics was Nietzsche and failure. So it was about failure, okay? And there was this student, PhD student from NYU, who was presenting on Nietzsche on failure. And each of the session was just 45 minutes. Now, the thing is that because I do meetups, I'm very cognizant of time passing. And he started painting the picture of how bad failure is, how bad you feel when you fail. And he was going on and on about it for 30 minutes. And all this, about 30 odd high school students, I saw their faces drop, okay, of saying, oh, this is just terrible, okay. Now, I know how Nietzsche thinks about failure, okay? And I really said, I can't let this happen, okay? So I raised my hand and he said, yes. So I said, I actually like failure. So everybody looks at me as if I was nuts. So I said, I wear failures as badge of honor. So again, then everybody was saying, what are you talking about? I said, look, when I look back upon things that I've done, I really never regret things that I have done and failed. I regret things that I did not try. Because what happens is that when you try something and fail, so firstly, many times you can figure out, okay, this is why I failed, and you can fix it. Sometimes you try it enough and realize that you can't do it. So you understand your limits, which you would never know if you did not hit against the limits. But for that, you have to fail. So the only option, if you want to grow, is to be open to failure and to welcome failure as a integral part of growth. It is very simple. This is a kind of a law of life. I said, this is just like muscles. If you say my muscles are never going to fail, you're not going to be able to make it strong. The only way to make them strong is to take them to failure and let them fail. Only then they grow forward. Okay, now for all the credit, and I was able to do this in about 2 minutes, and everybody was very excited. And to his credit, the lecturer said, if I don't get to finish my lecture, that is the moral of the story from Nietzsche on failure. But that's what it is, it's failure. What happens is that most people take failure as the failure of their person, not the particular thing they're doing. That is the difference, because they see the failure as a reflection of who they are. And they have said, I have failed. It is not I who has failed. It is that your capacity to do certain things that has failed. Maybe it is fixable, maybe it is not. You discover that. So let me bring up all the points that everybody made. The point about acceptance of what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, as Jyoti was saying. Basically, I'm agreeing with Avanik that failure is not a problem, because failure is all you are trying to play with the world and seeing what is possible, what is not possible. There is no other way. You're not born knowing what you can do and what you can't do. And even what you can do is not fixed. It's possible to improve it in tremendous ways in some directions and not much in other directions. And you will never discover the shape of it until you say it's okay to fail. Because that saying that it's not okay to fail is going to stop you from even exploring anything. Then Laura talked about limits. Yes, I can't do inorganic chemistry. I tried as hard as I could. I get a tutor. That's again about accepting of limits and working within your limits. Then let's see here. Joe talked about pass-fail. It's pass-fail not on the person, but on the particular thing that you did. And you always have the upside if you want to work on it, but you have to always be ready to accept your limits. Then let's see, Bunny talked about asking for help. That is also part of it. It's saying that I have limits and I don't have to do everything. Suppose I'm weak at something, I can work with somebody who is strong at that, and I offer them what I can, and they offer me what they can, and together we can do it. So it's like it's not as if you have to be great at everything. That's not how world is. We are living with people and working with people to make that happen. And the last point is transcendentalist. Yes, they screwed up on creating a community, but guess what? We are talking about them now. Okay, after all these years. So they have won. So they might have wrong ideas about how to put together a society, which is a complex thing. The knowledge that is required to put together a society and to make it work, make it just, is very hard. In the previous question, we saw how hard it is. And they couldn't figure that out. So what? They identified something which is true, that each person has this sacred spark within them. You have conscience, you have your own psyche, You have your own subconscious, own intuition. You must use it. Otherwise, you are losing out this unique ability or unique gift that you have of life, of consciousness, of engaging life. That's what it is. And there is a lot more to be learned. Even if that's all they did, saying, look, pay attention to what you have inside of you. That would be a great achievement. And failures of this kind, who cares? I mean, that's how I think about it. All right, let's see. This is actually a very good note to finish this on. Let's do one thing. Next time, we are going to actually be dealing with something, a theme which is very similar to what we are talking about. Joe, could you do the honors of reading the poem? We are going to be discussing the poem If by Rudyard Kipling next time. Sure. So this is going to be on next Monday, and I invite all of you to come for that. All these discussions, we are going to do it in this interactive manner in a very deep way. So that's the plan. All right, Joe, you're on.
Oh, you want me to read it right now?
Yeah, if you could read it now, right now. You can find it.
Oh,
sorry about that.
Yeah, I really don't have.
Just yeah, if you Google it, you'll find it. It's a Poetry Foundation. You will do a better job than me of reading it. So, Kate, yes.
I could.
You can read it.
It's on the meetup. Yeah, it's on the meetup page for next week, so I can grab it.
Oh, is it?
Go ahead, Katie. Go ahead.
I'm putting it up. If Joe gets there before me.
1 second. I should be here 1 more second.
Competitive race to the end.
I'm there.
All right, go for it.
So, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or be lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to, broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it in one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distant run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. And I think this is a perfect way of ending this meetup. And that is what we're going to be discussing next Monday. So don't miss it. See you folks soon. Bye. Bye.
Thanks for a great night.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Good night.
Bye. Bye.